Chair McKenna?
Yeah.
We're on ready when you are.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the August 6th Committee of the Whole meeting. Councillor Quinn and Councillor McGuire send regrets tonight, so I'm filling in as your chair. We'll start with our land acknowledgement. On August 6th, we acknowledge that this sacred land on which Smith Falls is now located has been a site of human activity for over 10,000 years and is rich in Indigenous history. This land is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We're grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who cared for the land and water in order that we might meet here today. We're also grateful to the Algonquin people for their contribution in the making of the Reader Canal, which runs through Smith Falls. We're mindful of broken covenants and the need to reconcile with all our relations. Together, may we care for this land and each other, drawing on the strengths of our mutual history of nation building through peace and friendship, being mindful of generations to come. So the meeting's called to order. I'll seek if there's any changes or amendments to the agenda. Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to propose to committee that item 9.9, our community grants policy update report, be deferred. We have two members absent, and I believe there's one that's going to be declaring a conflict on that one. So we will be short-handed there.
So if it did remain on the agenda, Councillor Miller would have declared a conflict. So I'll look to my colleagues.
Sure.
So with that change, there might be one other. Councillor Miller?
Thank you. So if we could add priority item 9.10 to get an update on our requested changes to the Public Arts Master Plan before it goes to Council later tonight.
Sure, why don't we call it 9.9?
Yes, great idea.
I'm looking to Council with those two amendments. I'll seek a motion to move. I move by Councillor Miller, second by Councillor Brennan. All in favor? And that's carried. We have now with that amended agenda, I'm not seeing any conflict of interest, no. We have no minutes of approval, no delegations. We may have one verbal report, I understand. C.O. Morris?
We do indeed, Mr. Chair, and that's with Mr. Drinking.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. Two quick updates from Development Services this evening. Firstly, to update Council and those watching at home, behind the scenes, work is underway with our consultants at Dillon on the new official plan. Last week, members of the steering committee, consisting of 4 department heads, the CAO and PAC representative, met with Dillon to discuss the project parameters, and also behind the scenes, they've also been working on reviewing the voluminous volume of information, plans, and studies that staff have provided Dillon, which help inform the background for this for the new plan. In mid to late September, we'll be holding a World Cafe consultation event as spelled out in the RFP, and that will be centered around the 5 key themes that we identified in our community engagement last year. So as Council will recall, those themes are downtown revitalization, housing, sustainability, community spaces, and transportation. At this point, staff are working on logistics for the event, as well as with the consultants and our communications department on publicity and developing a public launch to draw attention to the project and keep the public up to date and engaged on the official plan. Staff will regularly update Council on the progress of this OP as it moves along. We're still looking at a target of bringing this forward in August or September next year for council adoption. We'll also be engaging with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing as early as possible to ensure that the provincial interests are identified and hopefully that approval process is as seamless as possible. Secondly, Council is invited to save the date of October 28th for the annual Heritage Symposium, which will once again be held at the Station Theatre. The Heritage Committee is currently working on lining up the speakers in the program. However, the general theme would be to explore how a heritage conservation district can help a community identify and project a sense of place, and how a successful rollout can be a success story for business owners and the development community. So information will become available in the coming weeks as the agenda and the program are finalized. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Grenke. Then you don't have a date in November yet?
For the Heritage Symposium,
No.
oh, sorry.
So for the OP?
We do not yet. We're working with the consultants to define the space requirement and book the spaces as needed. We're looking for mid to late September for that.
Okay. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, thank you very much. So we have no committee of the whole consent reports. Priority issue number 9.1, Ms. Crowder, revised provincial funding agreement.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So the report before you is a good news story. The province of Ontario is providing the Small Business Advisory Centre of Smith Falls, Lanark County, and Leeds and Grenville some additional funding and extending their funding agreement from 1 year to 2 years. So this will ensure that we have funding over the next 2 years with an addition of an extra $100,000 over the 2-year period to help fund additional grants through the Starter Company Plus and Summer Company Plus programs. So we're recommending that Council authorize Mayor and Clerk to execute the new revised 2-year agreement with the province for the Small Business Advisory Centre.
Seeing thumbs up. Was this a surprise, Ms. Crowder, the additional money?
Not a surprise. They had been lobbying with the province for additional funding for the last year. So it's good that their voices were heard. Yeah.
It's great news.
So not just us, but all aspects over the province of Ontario received increased funding and additional agreements, extended agreements.
Well, thank you, Province of Ontario. I'm seeing consensus to support that recommendation. Thank you. And while you're there, the Downtown BIA MOU report.
Yes. So staff have been working with the BI board over the last year to update or create a new MOU, memorandum of understanding between both of the organizations. So there was a number of changes. The current or the previous MOU was developed originally in 2018 and updated again in 2022. And since the revitalization of our downtown, a lot of the infrastructure and management of the infrastructure has changed. So we wanted to update the MOU to reflect that. So as part of the MOU, we're also able to find some cost savings for the DBA as staff has taken on part of some of the costs for flowers and for maintenance into the operating budget. So the MOU has been brought to the board and it was approved. And so now we're asking council to execute it from our end. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Councilor Miller.
Thanks for this. I know they're glad to have this drafted and ready to go and have approved it at the board level. So thank you for this. They have a really limited budget. They're really always hesitant to increase the levy. And so our partnership's important work and us being willing to compromise on some of the expenses has been helped.
I'm seeing nodding. It was nice to see that there's a review date or an end to this as opposed to just an ongoing. Yeah, it was great. Councilor.
Yeah, I just like to add that the flowers are beautiful, and had some friends from the States up on Saturday, and they couldn't believe how lovely the town is. They compared it to Saratoga Springs, New York. So very proud of it.
That's great. Yeah, no doubt. So you have a consensus on council to support that. Thank you. Chief Cheeseborough is going to talk about bylaw enforcement officer.
Good evening, thank you, Mr. Chair. The purpose of the report tonight is to seek council's approval and to pass a bylaw to officially appoint a new bylaw officer on a 6-month contract. As council was made aware, due to a recent short-term leave by one of our officers, we've been overwhelmed and inundated with the amount of work placed on one bylaw officer. We posted for the position and were able to recruit an individual who is very eager and excited to have started her position on July the 30th. As required under Section 15 of the Police Services Act and Section 1 of the Provincial Offences Act, we are required to make that appointment. Tonight I'm recommending to council to pass a bylaw to appoint Daisy Surson as our new bylaw officer for a 6-month contract term.
Thank you. Questions or comments? I'm seeing thumbs up all around and consensus for that one as well. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
And thank Ms. Surson for applying and doing a good job.
Perfect. Thank you.
9.4, Director Clark on the programming for the Newtown Square. I'm looking to see Morris. Right?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Ms. Clark couldn't be here this evening, but we're bringing this back because at the last meeting, I think there was general consensus of the intent and the way it was drafted. There was a question, and quite a good one, about the list of organizations that are ineligible. And the ineligible, we've qualified it, or clarified it rather, in the policy that they would be ineligible from a complementary use of the facility. So so we've added some language to I think make that clear. So we bring that forward this evening to look for comment and hopefully consensus.
Thank you. Councilor Miller.
Thank you, and thanks for the edits to the wording. That makes a lot more sense to me.
SSEF utilized?
Yep. Yeah. So if a movie company wanted to come in and rent it, they could do so.
Exactly.
Pay
Yes.
pay the dollars.
We're open to any use within certain parameters, but we'll provide complimentary to only certain groups.
Councilor Brennan.
Just to promote, there is music in the park now, and it was on Saturday and Sunday. I think it's this weekend and going forward for August. So
Both
great use of it. Yeah.
So we have consensus on that, and thank Ms. Clark for us. We'll move on to Director Dauber, and we're going to talk about an exciting topic, asset retirement obligation policy.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to council. So we've completed our asset retirement obligation requirements under PSAB 3280. And I know that the auditor from KPMG back in January had spoken to council about it during the time of the financial statement presentation. Part of the process is to go through all the assets and look at which assets would be eligible to therefore incur a liability for the idea to remediate or to return to the original condition through release those assets. So that, and I believe the purpose of it is so that there's not a big hit on the accrual basis in the financial statements when the remediation happens. So it's to kind of guard against that large fluctuation down the road, is I believe what the intention was. So we engaged Services of Public Sector Digest to help us with that for a couple of reasons. One, they were able to do it in a reasonable price. So they had a lot of experience, but also they're updating our asset registry because that's where we're actually going to financially keep track of the financial section for the asset retirement obligations year over year in the financial statement. So that's one of the financial statements that comes out of our asset management system. So going through those assets and identifying, and as the auditor had spoken in January, the largest degree had to do with asbestos. But the findings were that there were, now there is an error in the number here. It says 6 buildings. It's actually 3 buildings. My apologies for that. We started with 6. 3 of them were recognized and be disqualified, that they didn't apply. The 3 that are identified would be the Cemetery Chapel, a small section of the Heritage House Museum, and then a small section of the wastewater treatment plant administration portion of the building. And all of them would be asbestos tile that at some point through construction, renovation, updating, that'll have to be removed. Excuse me, there was one lease that was identified, which is a totally different reason for an arrow, and that is the Victoria Park Tourism Office. That one lease, we have many leases with Parks Canada, and that one lease specifies that the grounds must be returned to the state at the point of when the lease began. At that point, there was not a building on there. So we actually have to set up an asset retirement obligation to potentially one day, should the lease end, tear the building down and dispose of it. And then the largest portion, 42 sanitary sewer assets that are asbestos concrete, and 49 stormwater assets, which are asbestos concrete. And then that'll look at the liability from when those are replaced eventually down the road. The financial impact, there's a large financial impact, but it's all accrual basis. So it doesn't affect our cash flow, it doesn't affect our tax levy, and it doesn't affect our overall financial status from a cash perspective. The total amount to be put aside for that liability be $865,000. So what you will see in the 23 financial statements is a fairly large jump in the long-term liabilities by $865,000. And that's offset by a decrease in the accumulated amortization, in the accumulated surplus, of the same amount. And the accumulated surplus generally, on average, year over year since 2019, it's increased by, on average, $5 million, which would be an increase of the assets or renewal of the assets. So the accumulated surplus, one of the biggest chunks, would be the net book value of the assets. So instead of going up by $5 million, it'll go up by $5 million minus $865,000. Again, that doesn't have an impact on the tax levy, and it doesn't have an impact on our cash. The second would be amortization expense. Excuse me, I apologize to council for that, my coughing. In the first year, there's going to be a large increase in amortization of $561,000. On average, the town has seen over the last 4 years an amortization expense of $3.9 million, and we'll see a larger one. The reason is a lot of the assets that have been identified for the ARO are fully amortized. So therefore, the whole amount of that asset retirement obligation is basically jammed into the first year. And then the difference between the 865 and the 561, that'll be a smaller increase in amortization every year going forward. We budget on a modified accrual basis, so therefore we don't budget for amortization, and there's a few other things that we don't budget for. And therefore, when we figure out what the actual surplus is for the town, amortization is actually pulled out. So again, no effect on our cash flow and no effect on our tax levy. Are there any questions?
Well, I have one. It was an interesting. It was dense, so I got my head around it. There's an art to presenting our audited statements every year. That one, it's a technical document that we and the accountants need to understand, but we also encourage it to be accessible so the public can understand it. And so we'll it's another change that we'll have to explain because there's some astute residents will read it and say, what's that change about? So we'll have to remind ourselves when we're talking about, or the auditor will, and you, and explain that difference, and we'll have to keep doing it going forward forever. We'll get used to it, but it's a change.
Absolutely, through you, Mr. Chair. It is a large change, and it's such a significant change to all municipalities that has become a talking point for financial statements in 2023. So they will, I believe that the auditors will harp in on it, and we'll remind them to make sure that they hone in on that and explain it in as much in layman terms as they possibly can. And through you, Mr. Chair, the resolution is to approve the policy a resolution is needed in order for the auditors to finalize off that portion of the audit. So we're asking for a resolution to approve the policy.
And I'm seeing nodding heads and thumbs up all around. So thank you, Director Dauber,
Thank you.
for keeping us legal. Director Grinke, you're back up, I believe, to talk about our tree canopies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. Staff are very pleased to bring forward for information our baseline tree canopy assessment. In 2021, Council adopted its first tree canopy policy, which articulated Council's commitment to enhancing our green space and tree canopy, recognizing the social, health, and environmental and economic benefits to the community. And this was referenced and conveyed in both the 2019 and 2023 strategic plans. The policy articulated a goal of reaching 30% tree coverage of the entire town, which was expressed as a minimum. The higher the number, the broader the overall benefits. In order to measure how we're doing, the assessment required the completion of a baseline. The policy required the completion of a baseline assessment within 3 years of adoption, which would then be updated from time to time to help measure how we are doing and how our canopy coverage is changing over the years. The report being presented to you this evening represents the product of a detailed desktop analysis done by a student of the 2019 aerial photography that forms part of our geographic information systems mapping that we rely on every day. In effect, the canopy of each identified tree was digitally mapped and then aggregated. So for the town as a whole and for individual areas of the town, a new layer was updated into our GIS system that identified the areas covered in trees. This was entirely a quantitative exercise. A given area had tree coverage or it didn't. The assessment did not measure tree health, tree species, or whether a tree or part of a tree was covered public or private property. That's an exercise that requires additional technical expertise and field work. What the exercise did tell us was that as a whole, 35% of the town's geographic area is covered with trees. On paper, that shows that we've already exceeded that target. However, we felt it was important to also break down this number by neighborhood. As the benefits of a healthy tree canopy are felt very locally, we felt it was important to assess the coverage in different parts of the town, which were identified based on historical development patterns, land use, and geography. And that mapping is included in Schedule A of the report. As the report shows, our existing coverage is far below the 30% target in many of our urban neighborhoods, especially north of the Rideau and in the downtown area. The part of the town that has the highest canopy coverage is the area outside our settlement area boundary that's more rural in nature, including the lands to the far southeast on Lawrence Street and the areas around the Gallipoe site. And that area is about roughly 61% tree covered. If we were to take out the rural part and only do the numbers for the inside the parts of the town that are already mostly developed, the total canopy coverage is about 25.5%. In the spirit of full disclosure, if we were to run the numbers today based on a hypothetical air photo done yesterday, then we'd actually probably be a little bit lower than we were in 2019, simply by virtue of development that's occurred on the forested fringe of the town since 2019. As another example, we removed several dozen highly invasive Norway maple trees along Beckwith, many of which were unhealthy, and replaced them with native trees. So the coverage today, just numerically, is likely lower than it was back then. But in the long run, the coverage will improve, and the mix of trees creates a much healthier landscape. So in the long run, we have a better outcome. Likewise, as council is aware, many trees have been planted in public spaces as well as through development. However, those won't begin to have a meaningful impact on our overall canopy for a number of years. That's to say, the report that we're presenting this evening and then subsequent snapshots looking at coverage over in the future are a long-term process, and decisions we make this year on planting will have their most measurable benefits decades from now. So while this report presents a snapshot in time, our job is not yet done. The report indicates a number of areas where we can focus our efforts to help improve our tree canopy coverage in all parts of town. The policy, or this assessment, also focuses on quantity. So the tree canopy policy also suggests the creation of an inventory that looks at quality, such as identifying the species mix, looking at disease and pest management, and forest management. So at this point, the report is provided for Council's information to advise on the status of our canopy based on the most recent information we have available, and this information will help provide a basis to guide strategic decisions in the future. So I'll leave it there and ask if Council has any questions on this report.
Thank you. Mayor Panko.
Sure, thank you, Carl, and to the staff members who contributed to this report. It's nice to see. A couple of questions, I guess. One, or sort of comments first. My observation, obviously, was you've covered that. We've seen development in recent years that have really clear-cut a lot of forest in order to enable development in Bellamy Farm, Maple Ridge, etc. So it's a concern going forward. We look at the Gallup Center and Lawrence Street development area as potential future development areas of our community. The LP will obviously define that. I worry about how much the tree canopy in that area could be lost as development occurs. So the first question would be, what comes next? So now that we have this, we know where we are at today. While we're at in 2019, I agree. I suspect we are lower today based on the loss of some tree cover. But what do we do with this? So does this lead to a tree preservation policy? Is there a method that we can have in place to require developers to preserve certain amounts or volumes or sizes of trees when it comes to future development, if council agrees that's a priority? That would be the first question. I guess the second would be, and you mentioned no species have not been identified through this process, and I without quantifying, I would say I look around town, I don't see a lot of ash trees. The rural area certainly has a lot of ash trees, and we know that virtually all of them are destined for the woodpile, unfortunately. But has there been any method of determining the number of ash trees in town that may still exist that could further reduce our canopy?
No. Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, those are excellent questions, and I guess there's a couple of different ways that we can look at this. Certainly, in terms of ash trees, unfortunately, we likely missed the boat in terms of the treatment. I know the City of Ottawa, some other municipalities have identified their ash trees very early on and engaged in treatment programs, and you still have certain streetscapes that have a canopy of reasonably healthy ash trees. I think moving forward, the best practice is really getting an appropriate mix. And I think one of the reasons our town and some others have lost a lot of canopy is there were trees of a single species that were planted at a single time, and if a bug sweeps through and removes those species, then that reduces the canopy. So I think a tree inventory would help identify, at least within the public realm, how many trees of each species we have, and trying to ensure that we have an appropriate mix. So if we start leaning too heavily in towards, say, sugar maples or elm trees or some other tree, then that'll help inform planting decisions and sort of our staff negotiations with developers on landscaping plans, at least within the public realm, to ensure that there's an overall mix. So I think the inventory will help us make decisions on tree canopy quality based on and develop information, a lot of which we don't really have today. There's a lot of our neighborhoods built in the 60s and 70s were heavily planted with Norway maples, for instance, and those have a shorter shelf life than some. They were planted because they grow fast. They're typically not planted today because they're highly invasive and they don't last long, but we're probably going to be making decisions in the next few years about what to replace those with when they come down. And I think the more data we get, the more information that'll help guide those operational decisions. I think the information here also identifies a few areas of the town where coverage is exceptionally low. That includes the downtown and some of our neighboring areas too. So I think based on that information, when we're looking at, say, a finite resource or finite budget for tree planting, potentially that helps us target planting in those areas, or gives us a little bit more leeway to request that as part of a development application. I think this information as a whole would be helpful to take to our consultants through the official plan project. Sustainability and sort of quality of life have been identified as key themes through the public engagement we've had today, and the healthy tree canopy, of course, feeds into that. So certainly we'd be looking at stronger policies that recognize a tree canopy as not just a nice to have, but also an asset, one of those few natural assets that appreciates in value as they grow, and sort of integrating that and supporting integration of that into development plans. It's certainly easy to clear cut an area, build something, and then plant a number of little trees to do their best to make up that canopy. So I think I'd be very curious through our official plan project to investigate some stronger tools that we may have to identify features that should be conserved as best as possible.
Okay, so if I may follow up, so I guess essentially, so the OP would be the first step in establishing policy towards preservation, and the next step after that would be then maybe a deeper policy, more specific on guidelines that we would require developers to follow when it comes to developing what may now be forest and tree canopy.
That would be my expectation. I think that would be the best and the strongest policy we'd have would sort of identify council's expectations and set that forward and give us the tools that we can use to help guide that. And I think there's certainly master planning that we can look at through the broader range of how do we want to do this. The canopy policy that was adopted in 2021 is fairly high level. It establishes some expectations for municipal land, but it's entirely but best practices for private property. So potentially those are conversations that can be held at budget time when we look at where council would like to where and how council would like to invest in tree canopy coverage.
Super. Well, thank you very much.
I've got Councillor Robinson and then Councillor Brennan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. More of a comment than anything else, Carl. Would this be an opportunity for us to identify areas of town that wouldn't necessarily be considered, big enough to do something like those, like the urban forest? Like we're doing in Highland Corbett Park there. Like, it doesn't take a lot of space, but you've got an awful pile of trees that are going to be planted in that spot. And I'm just thinking, throughout town, we've got to have properties around where, planting a couple of trees that grow extremely tall might not be the way to go. Maybe with the native species with a mini forest. Anyway, just thought.
Yeah, please, Carl.
Yeah, the mini forest is a really interesting concept, and I think the philosophy behind that is you plant a cluster of trees that are planted very close together, and then that's just going to encourage them all to grow. So you're still going to have that relatively compact area of maybe 1,000 square feet or so, and then I'm not sure how many of those trees are going to survive in the long term, but the expectation is they're going to grow a lot faster. But I think ultimately we work with the space that we have. We've identified a really neat opportunity between the library and town hall within the last couple of years, and we have a green space and trees where there weren't any beforehand. But I can definitely tell you that staff and our partners at Real and elsewhere have been having conversations on an ongoing basis, trying to identify opportunity sites that arise and seeing what we can work with. I think the challenge, of course, is always finding the right tree for the right space. if it's a gravel soil or sandy soil or contaminated soil, you want to make sure that you get the right tree that'll go there. There's not a whole lot. There's several trees, but not all of them that are really hardy to urban conditions. I think that's why a lot of ash trees and elm trees are planted, and because they tolerate the soil and they tolerate contamination and salt.
Councillor Brennan?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. This is really interesting. Good to know. Just to point out, with our planning process, and when we have a new development or a rebuild, and we've seen this in a couple of properties downtown. When we get to site plan control, then it's always our option or the planning committee's option to specify vegetation, i.e. trees. And so I think we've done that pretty consistently. I mean, it might be only 3 or 4 trees, but say it's a property on Maple Avenue or Beckwith Street, I think, Beckwith Street was another one, the end of Beckwith Street, where the planning committee said, well, we want some trees there, and we'll tell you what kind. And the developer's always amenable to that. So we do that now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, we do, and that is a routine part of the planning process. And certainly, every site is different. I think one of the challenges we have, say in Bellamy Farm, there's a lot of driveways and a lot of pipes running underground. They likely will not be able to get a nice row of silver maples there. Just they take up a lot of space. And I think one of the conversations in the future we'd be looking to have is exploring opportunities to retain existing vegetation where possible. But certainly that is a part of our planning. As a routine part of the planning process today is getting that green space. It's likely result in a canopy decrease because there's, especially if mature trees were removed there, and if it's a 1-for-1 or 2-for-1 ratio, and the trees will grow, but it takes time.
Thank you. C.O. Morris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to add the other motivation for doing this work and study and to understand the canopy cover was one of our strategic priorities is parks, trails, and recreation. And one of the initiatives within that bucket is to expand the urban forest. And at the time we developed this objective, we took a shot and kind of a high level look at the town and thought, we're probably somewhere south of 30% coverage. So we weren't too far off, we're above 30. But we also set a performance target of 5% increase per year. This work has forced us to relook at that because the study indicates there are approximately 885 acres of forested area. 5% is 40 acres, 44 acres a year. So we need to reassess the practicality of doing that. So I think we will be coming back once this discussion matures a little bit with a more realistic target for canopy cover, for increases in canopy cover.
Great, thank you. I had a question, Mr. Grink. It was around, you mentioned, and Malcolm's just got closer to the quantity. We have a quantity of coverage, but we don't have the end. We don't know exactly how many trees do we? Yeah.
That's correct.
It wasn't in the report, but
no, we don't know the number of trees. The trees, they certainly overlap as cover canopy overlaps as well. So we don't have a number of trees in either. It's easier for us to measure the private, within the public realm, number of trees in the parks and on the street. It's a lot of municipalities have inventoried those. It's almost impossible to meaningfully do that for private property.
so if the public come out to our November conversation on the official plan, and they really are stressing that our future planning must include better canopy coverage or whatever, then that would, if council adopts that philosophy and the province agrees, and it becomes an overarching planning tool. So it's, when Councillor Brennan's at his planning committee, instead of a nice to have, it might become a must have, or it gives it more strength. Is that because you mentioned to the mayor that the official plan is probably the best way to really give this whole thing teeth. And so am I reading too much into it?
Yeah, so the official plan, the current official plan sets out allows us to ask for a landscape plans, and the landscape plans prescribe tree planting. And as Councillor Brennan indicated, for the most part, that's a fairly small ticket item for most developers. If we ask for 3 trees along the frontage, it's not a make it or break it. Usually they'll ask us, will tell us what kind of tree you want, and we'll work there. And for the most part, the process goes smoothly. I think there's always the possibility if somebody pushes back. I think we can look for stronger tools there. And also I'd like to look at trees a little bit differently, potentially through sort of an asset management lens, especially around our natural heritage areas. If there's areas that we either set aside or say a wetland feature in between the Gallipo Center and the industrial land there, is there that sort of opportunity? I've seen some stormwater management plans that have had a fairly significant tree canopy, that have had a fairly robust tree planting plan around them to sort of enhance that ability. Low impact development where you're creating vegetated swales and potentially planting trees or else to absorb the runoff it's a nice to have. We encourage it, and perhaps that's something we look at a little bit more closely in terms of policy development that gives us sort of the current best practices to move forward in achieving council's goals.
Maybe I'll take one more stab at trying to ask my question. If this council prioritized trees and planting trees, the next council may not. If somehow the official plan, if the community and the council of the day wanted to make sure that this is a legacy that we want to keep going down, and 5% is ambitious per year, so we'll revisit that. Is that the place to do it, or do we just set policy that can be changed at any time by the future councils?
In my mind, it would be both. It wouldn't be an either or. The official plan sets somewhat more high level policies. The tree canopy policy outlines the policy we have right now outlines and implements in a little bit more granular detail some of the high level content in the official plan, and potentially both of those can be changed in the future.
Okay, thank you. CEO Morse, do you want to add anything to that?
I would just augment Mr. Grenke's response by saying the official plan really is the overarching. We need to make a policy objective statement in the official plan, and then we implement it through the tree canopy and the land alteration bylaw that we don't have yet. That would be an important policy piece to make sure we don't get clear cutting, because we can plant a lot of trees, but it can be overshadowed through simple clearing. So I would say, to answer your question specifically, embed it in the official plan, because that represents the council's desire at the time. Should future councils wish to deviate from that, it would be more the operating policies, the land alteration bylaw that could be changed as we go forward. The official plan should be fairly static going into the future.
Great. So council is being asked tonight to support this, and there's more to come. There's more pieces to this. I would invite Richard or yourself to come to the climate action work group. I think they'd be very interested in seeing the actual, if we could get a little more granular, see the actual images. I think this is really cool, and there's a lot of keeners on that committee that would love to have that discussion. So I think I saw support for the report, and thank Richard Grant for us very much for putting it together, Carol. And you're still staying there because 9.7 is our current building report. Mr. Grinke.
Thank you. The second reports from our chief building official are it's our building activity report for the first half of 2024, and Mr. Willows had provided comparison to the previous 4 years as well for us to look at numbers on a yearly basis. As indicated, the numbers do vary significantly from year to year, with the biggest jumps associated with some large projects, particularly in the first half of 2022. So the report shows that overall, in terms of the number of building permits at 44, and the permit value are lower than previous years. However, construction value is fairly static. We understand that this is broadly consistent with regional and national trends being a little bit softer this year. We've also not had a large housing project start this year. However, with the build out of subdivisions guided by market conditions, we may see a more robust number in the second half of 2024. I think most years we've generally seen a higher number in 2024. But I think as the report indicates, just providing this information on a regular basis helps us assess trends and benchmark service levels. And the CBO's report is provided for council's information. Thank you.
Comments or questions, Mayor Pank?
Yeah, looking over the numbers, Carl, new house permits, the numbers here, 2 in 2020, 14, 12, 24. Seems light from a standpoint, just I think Bellamy Farm as one example. Phase 1 was 160 townhomes, my understanding is they're almost all built out now, which would, I think, would number more than this. Am I missing something?
So through you, Mr. Chair, my take based on these numbers and my conversation with Mr. Willows is that the row houses, and just looking at the timing, is there's a larger number of them based on the approval. Bellamy Farm Phase 2, for example, with I believe 160 some units. The final approval happened in August of 2022, and there's a very significant number of building permits that came in the second half of the 2020 year, so the 2022 year. So these numbers, the numbers here aren't the whole year; it's just the first 6 months of each year.
Understand. The other question would be: would a block of 5 townhomes, as an example, be one permit?
They are each unit's an individual permit with individual occupancy.
Okay. So again, it's just potentially timing within that. Okay. Thank you.
So we're receiving this as information. It's just a note that it's just the first half, not even the first half of 2024 in those numbers. So that when you look, if the rest of the year keeps going, it'll be another decent year for development, construction, and improvements in our community, which is great to see. Mr. Grant.
Sorry, as an example, with Bellamy Farm Phase 2, I believe that almost all of the blocks, I think maybe with the exception of 1 or 2, almost all of them started before the beginning of 2024. So those numbers wouldn't be. So our building department are routinely doing inspections, keeping an eye on the project and keeping busy at Bellamy Farms, but those housing starts would have been reflected in previous years' statistics.
Our council really likes to see these reports, and thanks for bringing it forward. So we've received it. Appreciate it. Director Dauber, would you like to talk about your budget monitoring report for the first few months of the year? I hope you want to, because you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to council. So it's my understanding that past history was the first budget monitor report coming in the sixth period or the end of Q2, and then monthly going forward to the end of the year. So this brings that report at the end of Q2, June, and then we'll very shortly bring the the July report. My intention would be to add a capital update to show council where we are as far as not just financially with the capital budget, but also status and where the projects are located, just to provide that update, and then eventually bring some reserves information and reserve balances, and then projections towards where we anticipate we're going to land as far as reserve balances. So I'm looking to bring that in September, and that'll be a nice segue into starting up some budget discussions. So we'll just kind of add a few items to the budget monitor going forward. But as far as this one, this is specifically focused on operating at the end of the first half of the year. The information, the updates were sent to managers earlier before the report was sent out, just for any sort of comment. And you can see as Appendix A exactly how that's laid out. Now, I've been doing what's called budget monitors or updates for probably the last decade, and one thing I've found in the intention is to provide information to council that's meaningful and that helps council to know where we're at, but also to look towards the budget process. But one thing I've also found consistent is that every council, the information that provides it to them is inconsistent from one to another. So therefore, I guess where I'm going with that is in Appendix A, I'd be happy to take a run through fairly quickly and just look at it high level, or I'd be happy to answer questions if council has had a chance to review it. So I don't want to waste council's time if you don't want that level of information. So through you, Mr. Chair, I'd be looking to council just for a little bit of a nudging as to how much information you want me to go over tonight.
Yeah, thanks for asking. And I'm sure this council is as inconsistent as the next one. So I'll turn to my colleagues. And do you want to go into a little detail, or do you just want to ask specific questions if you have them? Do you want the overview? And it's, of course, you're not just talking to us. We have our residents who can read it, and they might be interested, but I'll look to my colleagues.
I'm fine with just the overview. I think I've gone through the report.
You've got, okay. People are fine with that. So if you have now, you want the overview from high level.
The summary.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So overall, when we take into consideration the revenues as well as the expenses, we're looking at a small surplus. We're operating currently in what would be considered a small surplus. The first part of Appendix A talks about the fact that in the property taxes and the payments in lieu, we've recognized most of the revenues that are going to come in, 97%. For property taxes, we're just missing the supplemental billings, which will be starting in July moving forward. Payments in lieu, we have 84% of it, which is a little surprising because I have never seen a municipality be that far ahead in their PIL billings. I usually don't see the numbers till August, so that just shows that the tax department is on top of the game. And then the operating grants and provincial fences were about 57%. Later on, as per previous practice, we do an adjustment to look at where we would be if it was halfway through the year as far as collecting those revenues. Is that a good level of detail to go forward with? Okay. So in the administration, mayor and council is 46%, pretty much on track. There's a couple little items, but they're very insignificant. Community programs, 29%. One item is a hospital donation. Hasn't been sent out yet. If you were to adjust it to half of that, it would bring us almost exactly at 50%. Administration, and you'll see this through the report a few times, the insurance costs have not been captured. The insurance costs have come in. They've come in. They're sitting in a prepaid expense account, which is on the balance sheet. It should have been distributed in June. We'll distribute it in July. So those numbers will come back to be reflective of what the expenses will be in the proper periods.
Dr. Dabber, just on that, it's a very large bill, the insurance.
It's extremely large, yes.
Do you have a sense as it's going? That was my question when we got to the end, but you brought it up. Is that going to throw our Like it's millions, isn't it?
I have to go back and have a look at it, but it's quite significant. But I'd absolutely be happy to bring that back. But I don't see. I certainly don't see the insurance going down. It's certainly going up at a much higher rate than the CPI adjustments.
And I don't need it early, just in your next
Sure.
scheduled. Yeah, okay, thanks.
When we just adjust out the expense lines within administration that haven't fully been utilized, and if you were to adjust them to 50% of the way through the year, we'd be just over 50% at this point. IT services is not too far off. There's just a few expenses that haven't been utilized in the first half that will be coming up. One of them would be training, and that'll hit us in September. I shouldn't say hit us, but we will start using that in September. Library is pretty close. Again, insurance, and then a couple other small items that were under the 50%. Transfer to capital from operations, we're on track. Of course, that's budgeted, and expenses will. The actuals will match the budget at the end of the year. Protective services overall is 46%. So all three areas within that are very, very close. And all of them have to do with, again, the insurance being distributed, and then a couple of small expense lines that haven't been utilized in the first half of the year. So overall, together, they're 46% of the budget, 50% of the way through the year. Now, community services, the administration is at 40%, and really that does come down to the insurance again, because that is one of the larger portions of the administration portion of parks and facilities. Parks is at 55%. There's been a few higher expenses in repairs and janitorial supplies. I have been speaking with the director about the hydro. It's quite a bit over what the budget is already. And we were just looking to see, is that a coding error? Is that something that needs to be corrected? And I believe it's, at this point, it looks like it might not be, and that might be a line that needs to be adjusted in the 2025 budget. That we believe that there's a possibility it might have been under budgeted. So we'll bring that information. We'll fully investigate that when I bring July's numbers back. We'll have a little more information on that. And if it is, then we'll reflect in the 2025 budget. Facilities is at 61%. That has to do with higher than anticipated repairs, some of the connectivity issues, but part of it is also the timing of the Montague Township fee. So we haven't received them yet, and that'll come in the second half. So that'll increase the revenues, which will decrease the overall net impact on the levy. Hillcrest Cemetery is right on track. Daycare, the biggest part, I put a couple of expenses down that they're a little bit higher on, but really when you bring in the timing of the county grant, that's the portion that really affects it, and that would actually just be just under 50% if half of that county grant had been received. The timing for the county grant, it comes in a little bit earlier, but there was a bit of delay in reporting back on the 2023 portion to the county. That's been done. It's been finalized and it's been approved by the county. So we should see that the county grant coming in fairly soon. Crossing guards, 60% of the staffing costs are incurred in the first half of the year, and then 40% would come in the second half of the year due to the summer holidays. Shared services is right on track. Economic development, 35%. There's a few costs that haven't been utilized in the first half, but we expect to see that take up or pick up in the second half, except for legal costs. Hopefully we don't experience that at all, but we'll see how the year unfolds, and we're hoping that one stays at zero. Small Business Advisory Center, it's a revenue neutral department. However, you can see there's an expense in there, and that's the timing of the grant. I have it down here as the MITT grant. Apparently the GL name is inaccurate. It's the one that it's been spoken about earlier from the Treasury Board. So once that grant comes in, again, it's the timing of it, and we should get that in the second half. So that should tidy that area up. Downtown Businesses, Association, the full year's levy has been recognized in the first half of the year, and there is an adjustment later on to kind of put it out to more of a realistic viewpoint of their expenses overall. But they would be closer to being on track with their budget if we didn't recognize the revenues fully in the first part of the year. With planning, 40%, a few of the pieces, training, conferences, travel, and legal, are under budget or under the anticipated 50% utilization as of the first half of the year. Conservation Authority, it's been fully recognized. We've paid the Conservation Authority, so we're done. So that's been fully captured. Building inspection revenue lines are generally higher in the second half than they are in the first year. I know you just had that report. I'm just over the past 10 years, I'm used to seeing that as just a par for the course, where a revenue neutral department like the building would be having expenses in the first half of the year, and then that tends to level out or even out in the second half of the year. Turning over to the next page, Public Works is at 33%. And again, that's another one I'm very accustomed to seeing. Generally, the summer is and then into the fall is when a lot of the activities, the maintenance activities through the roadways and that sort of thing happens. So this is fairly on track to where I would expect. There are some underutilized accounts, and there is a debenture that we pay. It's paid in the second half of the year, all at once, one payment for the year. Engineering's on track. Environmental services at 42%. Just with a few items that end up happening in the second half of the year that don't occur in the first half. And the airport is just a hair over, but for the most part, it's on track. Water treatment, and wastewater treatment. This was another one that I'm accustomed to seeing kind of flow out, because there's about a 2-month lag as far as the billings go and when they get recognized from the expenses. So we're always kind of expense heavy in the beginning, and then the revenues follow about 2 months along. Both of them, if I did the comparison and pulled some of those numbers out to be reflective more of the 50% of the way through the year, adjust the revenues, then we would be very close to being on track to 50%. Wastewater being 50%, but water being closer to about 41% at this point when that's adjusted. So taken literally exactly as the numbers are in the GL, we'd be looking at a $10 million surplus, which is not realistic. So when we backed out the 6 months of the tax revenues, 6 months of the PILs, and 6 months of the DBA revenues, we end up showing something a little more realistic in the form of about a $400,000 surplus at this point.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Just had one. Why would you pull out the Conservation Authority levy but not public health levy? I'm just curious as to why that one was flagged, or the county levy for that matter. I'm sure they're in there somewhere, but
yeah, I'm sorry. I just have to kind of put my mind back as I look through it. So the county levy, you're speaking of, which section would that be in?
Well, there's a bunch of them. Social services,
yeah,
paramedic services, and
so yeah, part of that would be the children's development.
So
but as far as what we pay up to them, we're on track. But as far as some of the payments that we get from them, I think it's pieced throughout. Little bits and pieces, but I can bring a little bit more detail on the next one.
That's fine.
Okay.
And the other question I had, are you the kind of director, because I noticed I didn't see any of your personal comments in there anywhere. You didn't say, I'm really confident this is going to be a great year, or don't worry, council, everything's going to be okay.
So I would say that it's a verbal, and usually I do that at the wrap up. So this is the point. So you've basically given me the introduction. But I would speak in.
I was starting to worry.
Yeah, no. So at this point, I would try and speak in a positive would be a non-negative, meaning I don't see anything that would imply that we would be in a bad way, anything that's alarming that would say that we wouldn't come out in a deficit position. I don't believe that there's anything that would indicate anything like that. In fact, indication would be that we might have a small, tidy surplus at the end of the year. I feel confident that we're on track.
I sleep better when you say things.
I will. Through the chair, I will take a note of that. But if you were to just take that revenue section out and just look at the net expenses for those others and just say, through this, we're saying the budget is zero. But if you were to take those out and just isolate the expenses, we're running at 50% of the way through the year. We're running somewhere between 46 and 47% of the expenses. So we're on track.
Good budget.
Yeah.
well thought out and planned, yeah. Councillor Brennan, do you want to say anything, or you had your hand up? so-
No, well, I just made a comment to next door here that surplus, I know it's just early on, but that'd be a nice tax cut.
Sure would.
Mhm.
Any other comments or questions? This was great, a terrific detail, and
Thank you.
look forward to the next one. The next 3 for update, the monthly one. Great. Now we deferred the community grants policy, and in its place, we've added the public arts master plan. Ms. Miller, not Ms. Miller. I don't know. I think there was a couple of specific questions that came up that we were hoping either Theo Morris or Ms. Crowder might answer. So do you want to ask them?
Okay. Thank you. And I not to speak for Councillor Brennan, but one of these questions, would you like to ask that one?
Oh, sure. So yeah, we had a good discussion on the presentation last week, and everybody, I think, supported the whole idea of a committee or getting this going. The one question that I had was with the 1% that was allocated within that presentation. So I'm happy to receive and adopt, just with the caveat that that part of the report is absent because we still have to talk about that, and so I just don't want to adopt something it's already embedded in it. That's all.
And through you,
Yeah,
Mr.
that
Chair.
was the consensus, Councillor.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And both the policy and the report said up to 1% of the budget. So it leaves that open for council to make that decision at budget time as to what the funding will be as part of the 2025 budget. And that's an annual discussion that will happen at budget too. And the idea is to have the committee be formed and then to put a plan and a budget to present to council at budget time to say these are the projects that the committee would like to investigate for 2025. And here's the estimated budget for that.
So you're saying these would be the parameters from 0 to 1.
Yeah.
And so the committee that would be their direction. If they come back with 2, then that's beyond. So, okay, I understand. Councillor Brennan.
Yeah, I'm not there. I'm not up to. And I don't support up to.
Okay. And I know there was there was no consensus at all when we talked about it for 1%. So you're correct on that. And you don't even want to see 0 to 1.
I don't think there should be any financial implication or stipulation in the policy at this point at all.
Okay. Other comments, Councillor Moore?
And then my question was just around the existing Arts Council, which I know hasn't met since before Christmas, but there are still members and they are still trying to sort that out. And so I wanted to confirm that they've been consulted because I don't want to start a new committee and replace them when they still exist in not the format they used to, but I want to make sure we've included them.
So through you, Mr. Chair, when this final draft, it was given to the Arts and Culture Council for comments and to review. I know they hadn't met since then. There was a review at one time, and they were heavily involved in the development of the plan during the process. So at that time, we didn't receive any further comments back from the committee to make any changes. So we didn't want to delay this anymore, and that's why we brought it for council. But I think with the new advisory committee, there's an opportunity to have the advisory committee through the municipality, as well as to continue to support the Arts and Culture Council when they decide, that they want to come back and what initiatives they want to do. I think it's a partnership there with the committee and the council, not necessarily one or the other.
So would we consider then asking them to join this committee? I just don't see a point in 2 committees, right? So I'm not sure if I'm misunderstanding, sorry.
Sure. So through you, Mr. Chair, I think the Smith Falls District Arts and Culture Council is there to support the arts community, the artists within the arts community, not necessarily to start policy or to do municipal investments in public art. I think that's why we need an advisory committee under the municipality. And I think that's where the difference is between the council and then this committee as well. But absolutely, we adjusted the terms of reference for this committee to allow anyone within the arts community or within the community to apply. The original document was set out to say members specifically of the Arts and Culture Council and the Station Theatre and the Chamber and the DBA, but we didn't want to make that very restrictive. So anyone from the Arts and Culture Council can apply, as well as someone from the Chamber, the DBA, any artist within our community can also apply, and then council can make the decision on who they want to appoint to that committee.
So it's good that we put it back on. I don't know how far we'll get tonight, because if we want to have a public arts policy, and there is a consensus around that, which includes the encouragement of public art in our community, and we've agreed we want to create an advisory committee to give us some direction and thoughts and within the parameters of what council said. But then we're not going to give them any direction around cost or budget. So I think, what are we asking them to do then? Because, I mean, some things don't cost money for sure, but public art costs. And so I'm just not sure what recommendations they could possibly make without some budget. Like, council could turn it all down because of the cost. So I'm just...
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councillor McGuire, nice to hear from you.
Thanks. I wonder if we could do it maybe differently than a 1% budget ask. If we said something like the committee will suggest a project, apply for grants, and council will consider the supplemental funding. Because I think with this stuff, when we look at the mural, it was majority funded by grants. But if the committee or if somebody's looking at what opportunities are out there and what opportunities exist with Smith Falls and putting those two together, then it's just a matter of us during budget discussions deciding whether we can make the gap. But I get the concerns with just setting aside 1%, and I don't like the idea of just saying nothing and having it have to fight against everything else at budget time. But maybe that's a way to make it work in the middle.
Okay. If I'm not mistaken, I think the committee will be encouraged to look at other sources of funding and not to the public purse first. But
every municipal staff looks at how we can offset the cost.
Is that built into that, into the policy almost? Is it the expectation that the committee will do that work, the advisory?
Yeah, well, we always do. I think every department, every staff member of a municipality, they always look to what grants they can apply for to offset the cost. So I think that's expected for any project, yeah.
Okay, just hold Councilor McGuire. Mayor Panko is going to have a comment.
So with respect to what's been said, I'm comfortable by indicating up to 1%. And I do recognize that could be from 0 to 1% of tax revenue. It's ultimately council's decision each year. So I guess at this stage, I guess there's a question, is there consensus to move ahead with that? And if not, then do we simply try to find a consensus that we can work with, or do we defer this and put it back to committee of the whole for further discussion?
Okay, I know where Councilor Theo Morris.
Yeah, I mean, one option at the risk of getting granular would be to look at the committee's going to need some guideposts so they know to what depth they should be looking at public art. So one option would be to look at up to a certain percent for the total budget and then set maybe half of that in external funding. So for instance, if there was a comfort level with up to 1% total budget and to a maximum of 0.5% municipally funded. So that ingrains the expectation that there would be fundraising or seeking of grants, but it would provide some guideposts for the committee to work with without committing the municipal tax dollars to the full budget. So that's one option, just to keep it clear that we want public art, council believes in it. We know there's a budget, but we need offsetting grants to help pay for a percentage of that. I picked 50%, but it could be something more than that. Then committee members know exactly the parameters they're working within. And that only commits council up to, in my example, 0.5% maximum taxation.
But in their work, they could think bigger, provided they found the extra money to do it. So there's a thought. Any, Ms. Crowder?
And through you, Mr. Chair. So part of the allocation of the annual budget is to create a reserve to preserve art moving forward. So that's something to consider as part of the budgetary ask annually. Best practices usually say it's a 1% municipal budget. That's what most municipalities that have public art programs and policies are allocating. But again, it's up to council's discretion. But a portion of that is to be put into a reserve for the maintenance of future public art, as well as developing larger projects for public art in the future as well.
Yeah, for me, saying that we support public art and then to say, but we don't want to commit any funding to it is like saying we want a beautiful downtown, but we don't want to pay for the flowers. Or we want a museum, but we don't want to pay for it. So I just struggle. I understand we don't want to say we're guaranteeing we're putting 1% into public art every year. We're not. We're either saying it's from 0 to 1, or 1% of the provincial levy is the most we'll spend annually on public art, and only half of that would be funded out of the tax base. So, or we don't have a public arts policy, because I don't know how we could. I guess you could start one, and we're going to learn pretty quickly. There are going to be requests for some funding. So I'm just struggling with it a little bit. Because the council did reach a consensus on they do want a public arts policy for lots of reasons. It would be, one is we don't want art popping up that hasn't been vetted or is bad or something, or not appropriate, or who knows. I don't remember.
Well, I agree. I think it's hard. It would be hard for us to recruit committee members who are going to come up with public art to populate our town and enhance the quality of life in our town if there's really no budget to work with. And I think there's more no guideposts. So I think we do need to define something then. I think it's embedded with everything we do that we seek grants every opportunity. We can certainly have this embedded in the policy that we would anticipate or expect all grant opportunities to be pursued. But even, I guess, without having money going to reserve, and that's probably the one I think which it means if we're committing money to reserve every year, I can appreciate if we have one big project to make $250,000, it might be multiple years before we ever be able to fund that based on policy. But I think most of this is discussion for budget time. Frankly, I think it's something we can make a decision today if we're comfortable to move ahead with certain parameters, but then it's still going to be discussed at budget as other items are, and how much do at that point in time, how much, if any, money do we want to commit to reserve? Because if it's between 0 and 1%, I look at it that we can commit between 0 and 1% at the time of budget.
Okay, Councillor Miller.
Thank you. So I agree with Mayor Panko. I'm wondering if, just to move us forward tonight, whether we could pass the public arts master plan without the money piece in it and put a hold on the policy piece until we maybe look at some other examples or have a conversation in budget time, like whether we could break that up and just take the first step.
Mayor Packer?
I think part of the plan is we need to start recruiting people to serve on this, right? And I think if we are, unless we have some form of commitment, it might be hard to recruit people who want to be part of this.
We could also defer the terms of reference for the committee and start to recruit in January.
Mrs. Crowder.
Through you. So in order to bring something to council for budget time, if we were to defer that, then we don't have a committee until next year, and budget has then already been passed. So that's why we tried to push it along and do that. So the master plan itself doesn't allocate any funding. There's a recommendation in there. The policy itself does say up to 1%, but if that's a contentious point, we can remove that monetary value within the policy, and then it's just going to council every year. And we can look at how much do we want to add to the reserve for the maintenance of long-term and to build a reserve to do larger projects, and what are we going to allocate annually to very specific projects that are going to happen within that year. If that is more comfortable for council, that's an easy fix, just to take that out of the policy altogether, the 1%.
Councillor McGuire, I can't see you raising your hand. Do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess, I support the policy. I support the up to 1% because it's an up to 1%. We're going to have a budget conversation. I think all the squabbling over it's kind of trivial because we're not having a budget conversation now. But I think the thing for me that's more important is that how much staff time or how is that going to be allocated? That competent staff are working at finding grants, applying for grants, and getting those grants. Because when I look at the mural, we talked like that was going to be the beginning of something, and it's been a couple of years now, and it was kind of a one-off, and we've lost that momentum. So for me, it's more about the in-kind contribution the town makes that's going to get results on this. I think there's a lot of grants. I think there's the opportunity for donations. This is the kind of stuff that community members want to invest in. But, the 0 to 1% thing it's not I don't think it's not fundamental to the policy for me if there's not competent staff dedicating time to moving the policy forward, helping the committee, and funding grants.
Okay, so you're supportive of the policy going forward with the 0 to 1% annual investment, which will be discussed annually. The mayor is comfortable with that. Is any other thoughts on it? Councillor Miller's offered a couple of other options that really deferring it to next year. And any thoughts from Councillor Robinson?
I've just been letting everything soak in. I don't know what to think about it, to be quite honest. I do like the idea of having the plan, but the only sticking point on me is how much money to allocate. But it's a budget discussion. So
we aren't allocating anything to it. We're just giving some parameters, 0 to up to 1%, or as CO Morris has suggested, 1% is the budget, but the town at any given year would only put in 50% on, if approved. So that was the compromise, I guess.
Did we lose you, Chris?
Councillor Brennan?
You have another stab at it. What did you just say, Director? You said something about taking that out.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, we can just eliminate the allocation, the budget allocation within the policy. And then it's just left for an annual allocation at budget time. We can just reword that section rather than putting a specific number to it.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy with that.
I thought you might be. Now, the mayor has pointed out that the members of that advisory committee have no goalposts or no, they could ask for 10 million, they could ask for, there's no direction given to them around that. And is that a fair, is that a good way to set a group up? I don't think so. However,
Well, the other thing, I guess, is art sometimes takes quite a bit of time to develop. And again, if we ultimately it will be every year when we'll set a budget for this. And whether it's $1, whether it's 1%, whether it's somewhere, probably somewhere in between, based on once we start whittling away the budget and the tax increase that we're all comfortable with. But I see from a practical standpoint, even just the challenges in, if we set a budget for a year, even a group coming together in several months to come up with a plan to say, okay, here's what we want to do this year. Now we need to find artists who are going to do this. Projects may take several months or longer to even complete. So from a practical standpoint, there's probably projects which will take, make a decision now to do something. It might be over a year before you actually implement that decision depends on what it is. So I think I think it's important to have some parameters in there. I think otherwise I think it's going to create real challenges for a committee to come up with any practical solutions, unless they're going to pick away at small solutions where we may not have the impact that we're seeking.
Okay. So we'll see if we can reach some kind of decision here. Councillor Brennan is very clear. Take it, any reference to a budget out of the policy. The Mayor and I and Councillor McGuire feel that there should be the parameter in there. I'd be fine with the CO's suggestion. I think the Mayor would be. Councillor McGuire would be. I'm looking to the other two.
Could I ask the CAO to remind us of his suggestion, just so when you say you're comfortable with it, if I
Sure.
can hear it one more time?
Yeah, so I think within the policy, we could embed the expectation that external funding be sought. Not unlike a civil project that we do, we expect to find outside funding for it. So in this case, I think to alleviate the burden on the taxpayer, we could set a percentage that has to be external funding. So so that could, my suggestion was 50% of the total budget would have to be raised from other sources. If we don't do that, if we don't provide those parameters, we're not going to get the big impactful projects. We're going to get small $5,000 projects, and they might be good projects, but if we expect this policy to take legs, grow legs, and have an impact, we need to motivate the group to think big, not only about the project, but think big about getting money from other sources. Councillor McGuire summed it up beautifully. There's money out there. We need to find it. And I wouldn't want to limit the impact this group could have by not setting a budget or setting an abnormally small budget. So best practice from the research is up to 1%. So we could look at other policies. We've already done that. We can tell you confidently best practice is up to 1%. I agree that's a large number, but it doesn't all have to come from the taxpayer, from the local taxpayer.
Councillor Brent?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this last week. I'd like to see where these other best practices come from and what size of municipality it is and what sort of money they're putting towards it. For instance, does anyone in Lanark County allocate 1% of their budget to an art project?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no one else in Lanark County has a public arts master plan or a policy. So when we started developing it, we looked to Kingston being within our geographical area, and they've done really great things with public art and set best practices for our area. There was a number of other policies that were referenced in the plan itself as background information that we looked at as well, but I'm happy to send you some additional
I'd love to look
information.
at that. Thank you, yeah.
And we can do our own research ourselves. You just Google it, it's all there. The whole world is, cities across the world, towns across the world are displaying public art and paying for it.
Yeah,
So-
Mr. Chair, I understand that, but I want to know how this decision, what was looked at
Okay.
for this recommendation.
That's right. So does that, have you gotten your information you were looking for from?
Yeah, and so I guess I would say I'm fine with the 0 to 1%, knowing that probably some years there will be 0, and other years those will be the years that we're planning. I like the limitation suggestion from CAO Morris that other dollars have to be found. I also liked what I heard about retaining or revitalizing existing art, because I think we need some maintenance work in some of our murals downtown. I think that's long overdue. So I'm fine with the master plan. I have, as I said, some concerns with our approach on the committee, and so just some hesitations on what this will mean for our terms of reference, and does on the roll funding go in this? Does it go somewhere else? So I think there's a lot of kind of operational, practical pieces that I'd like to just clear up in my head, but I can live with the master plan with the 0 to 1.
And thank you. I'm assuming that the terms of reference that when we go to appoint the committees all come back here anyway, so we'll have a closer look at it. All right, so we have 4 members supporting. All of council supports the Public Arts Master Plan, and we have 4 members of council who are supporting the 0 up to 1%, with 50% the expectation. And I think the clerk has written that detail down in the minutes that the CL has recommended and clarified a couple of times. So we have a consensus. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I have a motion to move in camera. I recommend a motion of council or the Corporation of Town of Smiths Falls as provided in section 239 of the Municipal Act. Move into closed session at 6:31 to discuss a personal matter about identifiable individuals. Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor Brennan. All in favor? Thank you very much. I don't have a time limit on this one. You're welcome to stay or not.
getting rid of the bulk of it.
Chair McGann,
Where?
we're good to go.
For the council?
Okay, welcome back. I appreciate your patience while we were in camera. The Horizon report is council provided direction to staff regarding a personal matter about identifiable individuals. Do we have any committee, board, or external organization updates? Seeing none. Any information listing? Seeing none. No notice of motions. Adjournment. Committee adjourned its proceedings at 6:57 and saying so adjourned to the next duly called meeting. Moved by Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor Brennan. All in favor? Meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.
Who told you that?
Tracy.
I guess there's.
Chris, we're going to take a couple minutes.
Blacked out
When
too.
did you get your tooth knocked out?
You're back on there, Panko.
Welcome back, everyone. This meeting is Smith Falls Town Council, Tuesday, August 6, 2024. I will open the meeting with our land acknowledgement. On August 6, 2024, we acknowledge that the sacred land in which Smith Falls is now located has been a site of human activity for over 10,000 years and is rich in Indigenous history. This land is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We're also grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who care for the land and water in northern Grim Meter today. We're also grateful to the Algonquin people for their contribution in the making of the Rideau Canal, which runs through Smith Falls. We're mindful of broken covenants and the need to reconcile with all our relations. Together may we care for this land and each other, drawing on the strength of our mutual history of nation building through peace and friendship, being mindful of generations to come. We'll call the meeting to order at 7:06 p.m. Please note we're going to remove item bylaw 10559-2024 from the consent agenda. For motion to approve the agenda with Councillor Brennan, please.
Thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Miller. That the August 6, 2024 regular council meeting agenda be approved as circulated.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Brennan, seconded by Councillor Miller, that the August 6, 2024 council meeting agenda be approved as circulated. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Ask for disclosure of pecuniary interest or conflict of interest in general nature thereof. Seeing none. We have no approval of minutes. Any council member reports? Just my own announcement. We'll have no meetings on the 12th and 19th. So yeah, so the next 2 weeks there'll be no meetings of committee or council. We have no presentations, no proclamations. We do have a consent agenda with Councillor Robinson. Would anybody like to pull any item from the consent agenda for further discussion? Okay, Clerk Costello, you have the items of the consent agenda, please.
Thank you. This evening on the consent agenda, we have bylaw 10557, the Public Arts Master Plan, as well as bylaw 10558 regarding the public arts policy. And we also have the Center Street Revitalization Master Plan, which is bylaw 10560-2024.
Okay. Anyone like to pull any item for further discussion? If not, Councillor Robinson, you have a motion.
Thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Miller, that items in the consent report number 09-2024 received from the clerk be received and adopted.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Robinson and seconded by Councillor Miller that the items in the consent report 09-2024 received from the clerk be received and adopted. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Moving forward, Councillor McKenna, you have our first motion.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Miller. That report 2024-2090 entitled Urban Tree Canopy Assessment, dated August 1st, be received as information.
Thank you. Discussion, please.
So we had a very interesting report from our planning department tonight, where a fairly sophisticated piece of technology helped us assess the canopy cover over the municipality of Smith Falls. And they broke the town into quadrants, several of them. And overall, we have about a 35% canopy cover of our municipality. It's, I'm going to lose it here. I had the number of acres. It's significant. It's gone.
Around 850, I believe.
885.
85.
Thank you. And what we've done is obviously some parts of town, depending on the age and the development, and then of course they have more tree canopy cover than others. So this is a piece of vital information that we'll build on going forward from here. Obviously, some other next steps is understanding the types of trees that we have, the threats to them, and further policy work will come out of this important first step.
Thank you. Any further discussion? It's moved by Councillor McKenna and seconded by Councillor Miller. That report 2024-090 entitled Urban Tree Canopy Assessment, dated August 1st, 2024 be received as information. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. And Councillor Miller, you're up next.
Thank you. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Brennan that report 2024-089 entitled Current Building Report from the Building Division dated August 1st, 2024 be received as information.
Thank you. Further discussion?
So this is a status update that we get. This one's to the end of June on building starts this year and permit numbers. So we appreciate that update to the end of June.
Thank you. Any further discussion? It is moved by Councillor Miller and seconded by Councillor Brennan. The report 2024-089 entitled Current Building Report from the Building Division dated August 1st, 2024 be received as information. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. We have a number of bylaws. Councillor McGuire, you're up first.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McKenna that the bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute a revised 2-year funding agreement with provincial government in the amount of $463,332 to support the Smith Falls, Lanark County, Lead the Granville Small Business Advisory Center be received and read a first time and taken as read a second time.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor McGuire, seconded by Councillor McKenna, that a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute a revised 2-year funding agreement with the provincial government in the amount of $463,332 to support the Smith Falls, Lanark County, and Leeds and Granville Small Business Advisory Center be received and read a first time and taken as read a second time. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Discussion, Councillor?
This is a good news story from the province. Due to additional funding, we're able to extend the agreement. It's going to extend the Starter Company Plus and the Summer Company grants, and they're also going to be having winter intakes. The grants are going to be between $3,000 and $5,000, and the intakes are open right now for the first program intake. The funding will support 14 to 15 new business grants and 22 to 24 businesses in training. If you're interested, Google the Small Business Advisory Center and Smith Falls, and hopefully it's fully subscribed by the end of the program.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Third reading, please.
Moved by myself. Oh, sorry. Wrong tab. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McKenna that the bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute a revised 2-year funding transfer agreement with the provincial government in the amount of $463,332 to support the Smith Falls, Lanark County, and the Leeds and Granville Small Business Advisory Center be now read a third time and finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 10561-2024.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor McGuire, seconded by Councillor McKenna, that a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute a revised 2-year funding transfer agreement with the provincial government in the amount of $463,332 to support the Smith Falls, Lanark County, and Leeds and Granville Small Business Advisory Center be now read a third time and finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 10561-2024. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. And Councillor Miller, you have our next bylaw.
Thank you. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McKenna that a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute a memorandum of understanding between the corporation of the town of Smith Falls and the Downtown Business Association be received and read a first time and taken as read a second time.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Miller and seconded by Councillor McKenna that a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute a memorandum of understanding between the corporation of the town of Smith Falls and the Downtown Business Association be received, read a first time, and taken as read a second time. All in favor? Carried. Discussion, please.
Thank you. So this is an updated agreement with our partners at the DBA. It better reflects our relationship and our responsibilities and kind of lays out the groundwork for how we'll work together over the next couple of years.
Okay. Third reading, please.
So moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McKenna that a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute a memorandum of understanding between the corporation of the town of Smith Falls and the Downtown Business Association be now read a third time and finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 10562-2024.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Miller, seconded by Councillor McKenna, that a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute a memorandum of understanding between the corporation of the town of Smith Falls and Downtown Business Association be now read a third time and finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 10562-2024. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. And Councillor Miller, you're back up.
Thank you. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McKenna that a bylaw to amend bylaws 4777-82 and 7691-2002 to rename the Downtown Business Association to Downtown Smith Falls Business Association be received and read a first time and taken as read a second time.
Thank you. It is moved by Councillor Miller and seconded by Councillor McKenna that a bylaw to amend bylaws 4777-82 and 7691-2002 to rename the Downtown Business Association to Downtown Smith Falls Business Association be received for the first time and taken as read a second time. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Discussion, please, Councillor Miller.
Thanks. This is mostly a housekeeping item. They changed their name a few years ago, and so we're just cleaning up our own records and getting that taken care of tonight.
Thank you. Third reading, please.
Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McKenna that a bylaw to amend bylaws 4777-82 and 7691-2002 to rename the Downtown Business Association to Downtown Smith Falls Business Association be now read a third time and finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 10563-2024.
Thank you. It is moved by Councillor Miller and seconded by Councillor McKenna that a bylaw to amend bylaws 4777-82 and 7691-2002 to rename the Downtown Business Association to Downtown Smith Falls Business Association be now read a third time and finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 10563-2024. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Robinson, you're up next.
Thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McKenna, that a bylaw to appoint Daisy Surson as a bylaw enforcement officer for the town of Smith Falls on a 6-month contract be received and read first time and taken as read a second time.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Robinson and seconded by Councillor McKenna. The bylaw to appoint Daisy Surson as a bylaw enforcement officer for the town of Smith Falls on a 6-month contract be received and read the first time and taken as read a second time. All in favor? Carried. Discussion, Councillor?
We have 2 bylaw enforcement officers, and one of them has taken an extended leave of absence for 6 months. So we needed someone to fill in the gap because we're a very busy town. So we were lucky enough to get a successful contract with Daisy Surson. So that's it.
Third reading, please.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McKenna, that a bylaw to appoint Daisy Surson as a bylaw enforcement officer for the town of Smith Falls on a 6-month contract be now read a third time and finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 10-564-2024.
Thank you. It is moved by Councillor Robinson and seconded by Councillor McKenna. A bylaw to appoint Daisy Surson as a bylaw enforcement officer for the town of Smith Falls on a 6-month contract be now read a third time and finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 10564-2024. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Back to you, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Brennan, that a bylaw to adopt the programming/event plan and associated policy for the town square be received and read a first time and taken as read a second time.
Thank you. It is moved by Councillor Robinson and seconded by Councillor Brennan that a bylaw to adopt the programming, event plan, and associated policy for the town square be received for the first time and taken as read a second time. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Discussion, please.
Sure. We didn't have an event program or policy for the new town square, and now we do. And hopefully this is going to help utilize this wonderful facility more effectively going forward.
Thank you. Third reading, please.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Brennan, that a bylaw to adopt the programming, event plan, and associated policy for the town square be now read a third time and finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 10-565-2024.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor Brennan, that a bylaw to adopt the programming, event plan, and associated policy for the town square be now read a third time and finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 10565-2024. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. And Councillor McGuire.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McKenna that a bylaw to adopt an asset retirement obligation policy be received and read a first time and taken as read a second time.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor McGuire, seconded by Councillor McKenna, that a bylaw to adopt an asset retirement obligation policy be received for the first time and taken as read a second time. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Further discussion, Councillor, please.
Okay, let's see if I can do this one. We've got the policy is put through by the Public Sector Accounting Board, and what it refers to is assets that the municipality is responsible for that cost money to retire in the sense of contamination or ongoing liability with it. So an example would be if we had a lot with contaminated soil, the cost of remediating that soil would be part of this policy. We had a consultant do the review for it with Director Dauber. And they identified 98 assets in the scope. So there were 6 buildings, 1 lease, 42 sanitary sewer assets, and 49 storm sewer assets. Because of how we do our accounting, as a municipality, we use a modified accrual approach to budgeting, and this process is based on an actual accrual-based accounting approach. So that means that there will be no financial budgetary impacts, but the 2023 financial statements will be impacted. The liabilities are increased by $865,613, and the amortization expense will be increased to $561,000. And this will be less going forward. So it seems like a good housekeeping issue. There's the report online for further detail, and I hope Director Dauber justice there.
Thank you. I think you've done a pretty comprehensive job of covering that. No further comments. Okay, a third reading, please.
Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McKenna that a bylaw to adopt an asset retirement obligation policy we now read a third time and finally passed signed sealed and numbered 10566-24.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor McGuire, seconded by Councillor McKenna that a bylaw to adopt an asset retirement obligation policy be now read a third time and finally passed signed sealed and numbered 10566-2024. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Any inquiries or announcements? No, thank you. So our confirmatory bylaw is with Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McKenna, that a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting on the 8th and 22nd days of July 2024 be received and read a first time and taken as read a second time.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor McKenna, that a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting on the 8th and 22nd days of July 2024 be received and read a first time and taken as read a second time. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Discussion, please.
It's just a procedural matter to get it officially into the record.
And third reading, please.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McKenna, that a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting on the 8th and 22nd days of July 2024 be now read a third time and finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 10-567-2024.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor McKenna, that a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting on the 8th and 22nd days of July 2024 be now read a third time and finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 10567-2024. All in favor? Carried. And the final piece of business, back to you, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Miller, that this council adjourn its proceedings at 7:24 p.m. and stand so adjourned until the next duly called meeting of council.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Robinson and seconded by Councillor Miller. This council adjourns proceedings at 7:24 p.m. and stands so adjourned until the next duly called meeting of council. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night, Christopher.
Thanks, good night.
I made a note to ask you. Brian, do you have a Richard?